Far across the galaxy, on a lonely, forgotten planet, there was a creature unlike any other, a being so powerful, so terrifying, that even the bravest warriors turned away at the mere thought of it. This creature was known as the ancient alien war dog, and its reputation had spread across the stars like wildfire. For centuries, people spoke of it in whispers, their voices filled with fear and awe. They said its eyes burned like molten lava, glowing red in the darkness of the caves where it lived. Its body was covered in thick, almost indestructible armor, and its jaws could crush metal like paper. It was the perfect weapon, created by a long-lost alien civilization to protect their homeworld during a great war. But after that war ended, the creature was abandoned. The war dog had no master, no purpose, only its memories of battle, a mind clouded with confusion, and a body that had known nothing but violence. It had been left alone in the deep caves of the planet, surrounded by nothing but darkness and silence. The planet itself seemed to echo with its loneliness, as though the very land mourned for the creature that had been created for war, but left with nothing to fight for. The war dog's existence became a legend, a story that was passed down through generations. The galaxy's inhabitants lived in fear, certain that anyone who dared to get close to the creature would never return. Some said it was cursed, others believed it was simply too dangerous to be approached. And yet, for all the warnings and all the fear, there was one person who did not fear the creature. One person who was determined to uncover the truth about the war dog, to understand what it really was, and perhaps to change its fate. That person was Lena. Lena was not like everyone else. While the galaxy trembled at the thought of the war dog, she saw things differently. Lena had always been curious. Ever since she was a child, she had asked questions about the universe, about the strange creatures that roamed distant planets, about the forgotten histories that no one seemed to remember, and about the old legends that seemed to have no clear answer. It was this curiosity that had brought her to the war dog's planet in the first place. Unlike most people, Lena didn't view the war dog as a monster. She believed that the creature's terrifying reputation was simply the result of misunderstanding. Sure, it had been created for battle, but maybe there was more to it than that. Maybe it had feelings, just like any other living being. Maybe it had been hurt, abandoned, and left alone in the darkness to deal with its own memories of violence. Lena was not afraid of what the creature had been. She wanted to know what it could become. As a child, Lena had read stories about the ancient war dog, how it had been part of a powerful alien army. The aliens who created it had long since vanished, leaving behind their greatest weapon with no clear purpose. The war dog had fought battles in the stars, its strength and fearsome abilities feared by even the most powerful civilizations. But when the war was over, the dog had been left on this desolate planet, locked away in the caves, forgotten by the rest of the universe. Lena had always wondered why no one had ever tried to go near it. Why had they allowed this creature to remain trapped in isolation for so long? Why hadn't anyone tried to learn more about it? The war dog was a symbol of fear, yes, but maybe it was also a symbol of something else, something deeper. A creature born in the flames of battle, but with the potential to find peace if given the chance. When Lena had first heard about the war dog from a group of explorers who had returned from the planet, she knew she had to go. The explorers had been terrified, speaking of the creature in fearful tones. They described its glowing eyes, its massive, hulking form, and the way it would seem to sense anyone who came near. They said the air around it was thick with energy, as if the very planet itself was alive with the creature's presence. But there was something about their descriptions that made Lena's heart race with excitement, not fear. It was as if the war dog was waiting for someone who wouldn't be afraid to approach it. And so, Lena made the decision. She would go to the planet. She would find the war dog and learn everything she could about it. While the galaxy watched from the safety of their ships and space stations, Lena was preparing for a journey unlike any other. She had a feeling that this creature, this ancient alien war dog, held the key to something bigger than anyone could imagine. But to find it, she would have to face the unknown. and that meant stepping into the very heart of the legend. The people around her didn't understand. The council warned her again and again about the dangers of the mission. They tried to convince her to turn back, to leave the war dog to its dark corner of the galaxy. They told her it was too dangerous, that no one could control such a beast, and that it was better left alone. But Lena wasn't afraid. She knew that if she didn't go, no one ever would. The galaxy would continue to live in fear, trapped by the stories and rumors, never knowing the truth. Lena couldn't let that happen. She had to know who the war dog really was. As Lena prepared for the journey, she felt a strange sense of calm. She knew that the road ahead would be filled with danger, but she was ready. She had trained for years, learning about alien species, ancient technologies, and the mysteries of the universe. She had learned how to survive in hostile environments, how to communicate with species that didn't speak the same language, and how to face challenges head-on. This mission would be no different. With a single bag packed with supplies, a translator device, and her unwavering determination, Lena boarded her ship and set course for the planet. The journey was long, and as she flew through the emptiness of space, she thought about the stories she had heard, the legends, the warnings, the fear. But she didn't let it hold her back. She had a mission, and nothing was going to stop her from completing it. As her ship approached the planet, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. The planet's surface was covered in rough, jagged mountains, and deep valleys stretched out below. The caves where the war dog was said to live were far beneath the surface, hidden from sight by miles of rock and stone. But Lena knew where to go. The coordinates she had gathered from ancient texts and databanks would lead her to the entrance of the war dog's lair. She landed her ship in a quiet valley, far from any signs of civilization. The air was thick with silence, the kind of silence that made you feel as though you were the only living thing for miles. Lena stepped out of the ship and into the unknown. The wind howled in the distance, carrying with it the scent of ancient earth. It felt as though the planet itself was watching her, waiting to see what she would do next. Lena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it. There was no turning back now. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop. She started walking toward the caves, her mind focused on the task at hand. As she moved deeper into the valley, the ground beneath her feet began to change. The earth was harder now, more solid, as though it was trying to keep her away. But Lena was undeterred. She had one goal, and nothing would stop her from reaching it. The entrance to the cave was hidden behind a massive rock formation. Lena approached it cautiously, her hand resting on the hilt of the weapon she carried for protection. She knew the war dog was near. She could feel it in her bones, the presence of something ancient, something powerful. But she also felt a strange sense of hope. This was what she had come for. And as she stepped into the darkness of the cave, Lena had no idea just how much her life, and the fate of the war dog, was about to change forever. Lena had made the decision. She had to face the legendary war dog. The galaxy was filled with fear about it, and most believed that no one could ever approach it without being destroyed. But Lena wasn't like most people. Her mind was different. Where others saw only terror, she saw an opportunity to uncover the truth, to reveal what was hidden beneath the layers of legend and fear. She believed that this war dog, this ancient creature, wasn't just a weapon. It was a living being, with emotions and memories, just like any other. As Lena stood on the surface of the strange planet, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what she was about to do. She had heard the warnings from countless explorers and historians. They all spoke of the war dog in hushed tones, as though its name alone could cause destruction. Some claimed it was cursed. Others said it was the product of a long-lost alien race that had created it for war. And now it was forgotten, left alone in a dark cave, waiting for someone foolish enough to disturb it. But Lena didn't believe in curses. She didn't believe in monsters. What she believed in was understanding. She had always had an instinct to understand the unknown, to ask questions when others were too afraid. She believed the war dog had been misunderstood for centuries. Maybe it had been created for war, but that didn't mean it had to remain a symbol of fear forever. Maybe, just maybe, if someone showed it kindness and respect, it could be different. For Lena, the mission wasn't just about uncovering the hidden creature. It was about changing the way the galaxy viewed such beings. She had always felt that many of the legends and stories were incomplete. They were often shaped by fear, shaped by the unknown, and often left the truth behind the shadows. But Lena was different. She was determined to rewrite that story, one that included compassion and understanding. With every step she took, the atmosphere of the planet seemed to grow heavier. The air around her felt thick with the presence of something ancient, something powerful. It was as though the planet itself knew why she had come. The wind whispered through the jagged rocks, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble with every step. It wasn't an easy journey, but it wasn't meant to be. Lena knew that if the war dog was as dangerous as everyone said, it wouldn't just show itself easily. The path was treacherous, filled with sharp rocks and hidden dangers. But Lena's training had prepared her for this. She had learned to survive in tough conditions, to find her way through the harshest environments. Her experience with other alien species had taught her how to listen, how to observe. And as she continued her journey into the heart of the planet, she kept her senses open, searching for any sign of the war dog. She knew it was close, that it was aware of her presence. For hours, Lena trekked deeper into the planet's cavernous heart. The deeper she went, the darker it became. The walls of the cave seemed to close in on her, and the silence was almost deafening. But Lena pressed on. There was no turning back now. The only way forward was through. As the cave twisted and turned, Lena's thoughts raced. She couldn't help but wonder, what had this creature been like before it had been abandoned? Who had created it? And why? What had it seen during the wars it had fought in? Was it truly as ruthless as the stories said, or had it just been forced into a role it never wanted? The war dog, after all, was not a natural being. It had been bred for battle, trained to fight, and its purpose had been written in the stars. But now that the war was over, what did it have left? Lena didn't know the answers, but she was determined to find them. She had always believed that even the most dangerous creatures had a deeper story. Maybe the war dog was not just an animal to be feared. Maybe it was a soul who had been caught in a conflict it never asked for, a being who had only known violence but could learn peace. It was as she was lost in thought, walking deeper into the darkness of the cave, that she finally heard it. A low growl, a sound that sent chills down her spine. Lena froze. The growl was not like any sound she had heard before. It wasn't the growl of a typical predator. It was deep, heavy, as if the very cave itself was vibrating with the power of it. The growl was followed by the sound of heavy footsteps, like the earth was shaking beneath the creature's weight. Lena's heart raced. She knew it. She had found it. The war dog was near. She could hear it getting closer, the sound of its footsteps growing louder with each passing second. Her instincts kicked in, and she quickly pulled out her translator device, making sure it was ready. Lena had no intention of approaching the war dog in a way that would make it feel threatened. She had to approach carefully, with respect. She knew that if she made the wrong move, the creature might view her as an enemy, and she didn't want that. Lena didn't speak immediately. Instead, she waited, listening. She knew that the war dog was probably watching her, studying her every move, and that was fine. She would let it. She would let it make the first move, but she would not back down. She was ready for whatever came next. And then, the creature stepped into the dim light of the cavern. Lena had heard the stories, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight before her. The war dog was massive, towering over her like a mountain of muscle and fur. Its body was covered in thick, almost impenetrable armor that shimmered in the dim light, and its eyes, they were the brightest red she had ever seen, glowing with an intensity that almost felt like they were burning into her soul. The war dog was everything the stories had described and more. It was powerful, it was terrifying, and it was beautiful in its own way. For a moment, the creature simply stood there, its glowing eyes locked on Lena. It was studying her, just as she had expected. The war dog didn't make any aggressive moves, but its posture was stiff, ready for action if needed. Its massive jaws were bared slightly, revealing rows of sharp teeth, but Lena could see that it wasn't attacking. Not yet. Lena took a slow, steady breath. This was the moment. She had to prove that she wasn't a threat, that she wasn't like all the others who had come before her. She slowly raised her hand, keeping it at her side, not making any sudden movements. She knew that if she approached too quickly, it might see her as a danger. The war dog needed to feel safe. "I'm not here to hurt you," Lena said quietly, her voice calm but firm. She knew it could understand her words, even if it didn't speak her language. She hoped her tone would convey that she wasn't afraid, that she didn't view the war dog as an enemy. She didn't want to approach it with fear, because she knew that fear could only make things worse. The war dog's eyes seemed to flicker, and for the first time, it moved. But it wasn't an attack. Instead, it stepped closer, its massive paws leaving heavy marks in the dirt. Lena's heart raced as it drew near, but she stood her ground. She didn't take a step back. She didn't flinch. The war dog stopped just a few feet away from her, its eyes still locked onto hers. It sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring as it took in her scent. For a moment, Lena thought it might growl again or show signs of aggression. But instead, it simply stared, its eyes full of curiosity. Lena slowly reached for the translator on her belt and activated it, allowing it to pick up her words. "I know you've been alone for a long time. I know the galaxy fears you, but I don't. I want to understand you." The war dog didn't respond, but it tilted its head slightly, almost as if it were considering her words. Lena felt a sense of hope rising inside her. Maybe, just maybe, the war dog wasn't as untouchable as everyone had thought. Maybe it was just waiting for someone to show it a different path. And that's when she realized. The real journey had just begun. Lena's heart raced as she stood face to face with the war dog. The creature was enormous, almost overwhelming in its presence. Its eyes, glowing with a fiery red intensity, watched her closely. She could feel the weight of its gaze, as though it were searching for something. Maybe answers, maybe trust. But there was no turning back now. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to let fear stand in her way. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence in the cave was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of the war dog's heavy breathing. Lena could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. But she didn't move. She knew that every step she took from here on out would be crucial. The war dog was an ancient being, created for battle, and its instincts must have been honed over centuries of fighting. It was likely to be wary of any human who came into its territory. Still, Lena wasn't afraid. She had prepared for this. The stories about the war dog had painted it as a monster, a creature to be feared and avoided at all costs. But Lena had always believed that there was more to the story. She had always believed that even the most dangerous creatures had a heart that could be reached if someone was brave enough to try. She reached out slowly, keeping her movements gentle, trying not to make any sudden gestures that might startle the war dog. The creature seemed to notice her careful approach. Its body remained tense, but it didn't make any threatening moves. Instead, it just stood there, watching her, its massive body looming like a shadow in the dim light of the cave. Lena took another step forward, her eyes never leaving the war dog's. "I know you've been alone for a long time," she said softly, her voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I believe you deserve more than to be feared and locked away." She waited for a response, but the war dog remained silent. It was as if it was processing her words, trying to understand whether she was telling the truth. Lena knew it wasn't easy for the war dog to trust anyone, especially not after everything it had been through. It had been created for a purpose that had involved nothing but destruction. It had fought wars, seen battles, and been a weapon in the hands of those who never cared for its feelings. It had likely spent years, maybe even centuries, locked away, abandoned, and forgotten. The more Lena thought about it, the more she realized how tragic the war dog's life must have been. It wasn't its fault that it had been created to fight. It wasn't its fault that it had been cast aside when the war ended, left alone in the darkness of the caves. But now, Lena was here. She could be the one to change that. She could be the one to show the war dog that there was another way, a way to be free of the violence it had known for so long. Lena took another step closer, this time moving toward the war dog's massive form. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew she had to try. The war dog's eyes never left her, but there was something different in them now. The fire in its gaze wasn't as intense as it had been when they first met. Instead, it was more like a quiet curiosity, as though the creature was trying to figure out who this human was and what she was doing in its world. "I know you've been through a lot," Lena continued, her voice filled with compassion. "But you don't have to be alone anymore. You don't have to be trapped in the past. I'm not afraid of you. I want to help you, if you'll let me." The war dog's head tilted slightly, as though it were considering her words. Lena could see the muscles in its body relax just a little, but it still wasn't fully at ease. She knew it would take time to gain its trust, but she was willing to be patient. She had to be. After all, the war dog had spent so long alone, so long trapped in its own fear and pain. It wouldn't change overnight. Lena took a deep breath and slowly knelt down, keeping her posture non-threatening. She wasn't sure what the war dog would do, but she hoped that by lowering herself to its level, she could show it that she wasn't a threat. She wasn't here to fight. It wasn't about strength or power. It was about understanding. For a moment, the war dog didn't move. It just stood there, watching her. Lena's heart beat faster in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment. This was the turning point, the moment that could change everything. If the war dog accepted her, if it allowed her to get closer, she knew she would have the chance to learn about its past, to understand what had made it the way it was. Then something unexpected happened. The war dog took a step forward. Lena froze. She wasn't sure what the creature was doing, but it wasn't attacking. It was simply moving closer, its massive form dwarfing her as it approached. The war dog sniffed the air around her, its nose twitching as it took in her scent. Lena held her breath, waiting. This was a critical moment. She had to stay calm, to show the creature that she wasn't afraid, that she was here to help. The war dog's massive head lowered slightly, and Lena could see the faintest flicker of curiosity in its eyes. It wasn't the fiery intensity that had been there before, but something softer, something more curious. It was as if the creature was trying to figure out who she was and what she wanted. Lena reached out slowly, her hand trembling slightly. She didn't want to make a sudden movement, but she couldn't resist the urge to try. She wanted to show the war dog that it didn't have to be afraid, that it could trust her. She was offering it something that no one else had: friendship. The war dog's eyes flickered, and for the first time, Lena thought she saw a glimmer of something else. Something that wasn't fear, anger, or violence. It was something more like longing, as though the war dog was remembering a time before the war, a time before it had been trapped in this cave. It was remembering a time when it might have had a different life, one filled with companionship and peace. Slowly, carefully, Lena extended her hand toward the war dog. She didn't know what would happen next, but she hoped that by taking this step, she could help the creature see that it didn't have to be a weapon anymore. It didn't have to be a prisoner of its past. To her surprise, the war dog didn't pull away. It took a step closer, its massive body moving with a grace that belied its size. The creature's eyes never left her, but there was a softness in them now, something that had been missing before. It wasn't the fierce, unyielding gaze of a creature bent on destruction. It was a gaze that seemed to be searching for something. Maybe it was searching for connection. Maybe it was searching for peace. Lena's heart soared as the war dog stepped even closer, its body now just a few feet from hers. She could feel the heat radiating from its massive form, but she didn't flinch. She was ready. She knew this was the moment when everything could change. This was the moment when the war dog could begin its journey toward freedom. The war dog's eyes flickered again, and this time, Lena could see something even more surprising. The creature's massive head lowered just a little, as though it was offering a gesture of respect. Lena's breath caught in her throat. It was small, but it was a sign. The war dog was beginning to trust her. With a quiet, steady voice, Lena spoke again, her words full of warmth and understanding. "I know you've been alone for a long time, but you don't have to be alone anymore. I'm here, and I'll help you. Together, we can find a new path, a path that isn't defined by violence." The war dog didn't make any sound. It didn't growl, bark, or roar. But for the first time, Lena felt a sense of peace in the air. It wasn't the peace of an easy victory or a battle won. It was the peace of understanding. The peace of two beings, so different, beginning to connect. And in that moment, Lena knew that this journey had only just begun. The air in the cave felt heavier now, but in a different way. It wasn't the weight of fear or danger anymore. It was the weight of something much more delicate. Trust. Lena could feel it growing between her and the war dog, even though they hadn't spoken a single word to each other. It wasn't the kind of trust that came easily. It was the kind that took time, patience, and understanding. But it was there, and it was enough for Lena to believe that this was the right path. The war dog, still massive and imposing, remained close. Its fiery red eyes, which had once been full of hostility and suspicion, now held something different. Curiosity. Lena had seen it before in animals she had encountered on her missions, an animal that was trying to figure out whether it could trust someone. And in that moment, she felt that the war dog was doing just that. It was weighing her actions, considering her words, and deciding if she was truly someone it could trust. Lena knew it wasn't going to be easy. The war dog had been alone for so long, and it had been created for violence and war, not for peace or friendship. The legends spoke of how it had been a force of destruction, tearing through enemies with no mercy. But Lena didn't believe that was all the war dog was. She believed there was more to its story, more than anyone had ever understood. She continued to stand there, her posture calm, not making any sudden moves. The war dog was still watching her, but its gaze was no longer filled with the same intensity. Now there was something more relaxed about it. Not completely at ease, but no longer filled with immediate danger. Its heavy breaths echoed through the cave, but there was no growl, no sign of aggression, just a stillness that hung in the air like a quiet promise. Lena took another slow, careful step forward, watching the war dog closely. She wasn't going to make the mistake of thinking it was over, that the trust had already been built. It was a slow process, and she knew it would take time. But the fact that it hadn't attacked her yet was a small victory in itself. "I know you've been through so much," she said softly, her voice echoing in the quiet cave. "You've been created to fight, to destroy. But that's not all you are. You have a choice now. You don't have to fight anymore. You can choose something else, something better." For a long moment, the war dog didn't react. It stood still, its body rigid, its glowing eyes locked on her. Lena had no idea what the creature was thinking, but she could sense that it was trying to process everything she had said. The war dog was old, ancient even, and its history was one of pain and destruction. It wasn't just going to let go of that past so easily. But Lena wasn't asking it to. She wasn't asking the war dog to forget what it had been. She was asking it to see the possibility of something more. "I'm not here to change you," Lena continued. "I'm here to help you remember who you really are. You're more than just a weapon. You're a living being with thoughts and feelings. You've been locked away for too long, but you don't have to be alone anymore. You don't have to be trapped in the darkness of your past. Together, we can find a way out." The war dog shifted slightly, its massive form moving with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. It took a step toward her. Lena didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on it, waiting. She knew that this was a critical moment. The war dog could still choose to attack, to push her away. It could choose to remain a prisoner of its past, just as it had been for centuries. But something in its eyes changed. It wasn't the fiery red of aggression anymore. There was a flicker of something else, a glimmer of hope, hope that it could change. Hope that maybe, just maybe, it could find peace. And that small flicker was enough to make Lena believe in the possibility of a different future for the war dog. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I know it's hard. I know you've been hurt, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We can face the past together, and we can build a new future." The war dog took another slow step forward, and this time it didn't stop. It was closer now, its massive body towering over Lena, but there was no sign of aggression in its movements. It was as if it was testing the waters, feeling out the situation, trying to figure out if this was real. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure if the war dog was ready for what she was offering, but she was willing to wait. She knew that even the smallest step toward trust was a victory. Lena slowly extended her hand again, just a few inches away from the war dog's face. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she held her ground. She wasn't going to force anything. If the war dog wasn't ready, it wasn't ready. But if it was willing to take that first step, she would be there, ready to meet it halfway. The war dog sniffed the air around her, its enormous nostrils flaring. Lena could feel the heat of its breath, and she felt a strange sense of connection between them. The war dog wasn't a monster. It was a creature that had been shaped by its past, but it wasn't doomed to be defined by it forever. It could still change, and Lena was determined to help it do that. For a moment, the war dog didn't move. It just stood there, its head tilted slightly as it studied her hand. Lena's heart beat louder in her chest, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. This was the moment. This was the test. If the war dog accepted her offer, it would be the first step toward healing, for both of them. And then, in a slow, deliberate motion, the war dog lowered its massive head, just enough to nudge her hand with its nose. It was a soft touch, almost tentative, but it was enough. Lena's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't an attack. It was a sign of acceptance, a sign that the war dog was beginning to trust her. Tears filled Lena's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. This moment, this connection, was more than she had ever hoped for. The war dog, this creature that had been feared by so many, was beginning to let go of its past. It was beginning to see the possibility of something better, something that didn't involve destruction or violence. Lena slowly ran her hand across the war dog's thick fur, feeling the warmth of its body beneath her touch. The war dog stood still, its eyes closing briefly as if to savor the contact. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that didn't have to be defined by fear and destruction. The silence in the cave seemed to stretch on forever, but it was a peaceful silence, a silence filled with the promise of what was to come. Lena knew that this was only the start of their journey together. There would be challenges ahead, and the war dog's past wouldn't be easy to overcome, but they could face it together. They could face the future together. "I'm proud of you," Lena whispered, though she wasn't sure if the war dog could understand the words. But in that moment, she didn't need to say more. The bond between them had already been formed. The war dog took a step back, its eyes meeting hers again. It wasn't the same fiery red that had been there before. It was softer, almost trusting. Lena knew that the hardest part was over. She had reached it, and now it was time for them to move forward together. Lena sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor of the cave, her gaze fixed on the war dog. Its massive form loomed in front of her, but now, for the first time, it didn't feel as intimidating. The war dog had taken another step toward trust, and that small movement had shifted something deep inside Lena. She could feel it in her chest. The connection between them was growing stronger, and with each passing moment, She was more certain that she was doing the right thing. The war dog had been through so much. Its past was filled with violence, bloodshed, and a purpose that was only about destruction. But now, in this moment, Lena knew that it didn't have to be that way anymore. The war dog could have a different life. It could be free from the past that had haunted it for so long. And Lena could be the one to help it find that freedom. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The war dog's eyes, though still fierce, were no longer filled with the same suspicion and anger they had held when they first met. There was something softer there now, a curiosity, a flicker of hope. Lena had no illusions that everything was fixed. She knew this would be a slow process, but the progress they had made in such a short time was enough to give her confidence that the war dog could change. Lena had heard the legends, the stories about how the war dog had been created for battle, for war, to bring fear and destruction wherever it went. The soldiers who had created it had never cared for the creature itself. They had only seen it as a weapon. They had used it until the war ended, and when the fighting stopped, they locked the war dog away, forgotten and alone, hidden deep in the caves. No one had ever considered what the creature had felt. No one had ever thought about what it had endured. Lena couldn't let the war dog remain a prisoner of its past. She couldn't let it be trapped in the darkness forever. She knew there was more to the war dog than just the stories. There was a soul, a being that had once been something more than just a weapon, and she would be the one to help it rediscover that. The war dog moved again, this time a little closer. Lena didn't move, didn't flinch. She had learned that the key to this was patience. It wasn't just about gaining the war dog's trust. It was about showing the creature that there was no reason to fear her, that there was no reason to be afraid of what might come next, that there could be peace, even for something as fierce as it was. Slowly, the war dog lowered its head, its nose brushing the ground as it sniffed around Lena. She stayed perfectly still, letting the war dog approach her at its own pace. She was in no rush. She knew this was a delicate moment, and rushing would only push the creature away. It had to come to her when it was ready.